All right, welcome back, you future web devs. In this one, we are in part 2 of the series of building a balance sheet. And this one's going to be focusing solely on the CSS portion. So if that's what you're here for, that's what we are going to start off with. I believe we left off at step number 28. And so we're just going to continue on. And if this is your first time watching, my name is Rob. I'm a coding instructor over here at PreCodeCamp, where we try to go through these modules with you and try to help you out in learning it from an instructor point of view rather than just supplying you with the answer. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive in. And all we ask you to do is give us a real quick and follow, and it's both free, right? So go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and dive into our next step. All right, good. We are done with the tables and we're moving on to styling. So this one right here, it just wants to set us up. So I'm going to go ahead and do the HTML. It wants to set us up to make sure that we're not taking into consideration the box model, right? And where paddings and borders, they take away from the total height and width of the element. And so here, when we're saying, hey, we want the box sizing to be border box, and this is a common practice to do, by the way, and this allows you to have more control style-wise when it comes to shaping your elements. So anyways, that's what it's wanting us to do. It's going to take place over the entire HTML file and simply wipe everything out that's standard, and we're going to go with border box for our box model. Okay, so let's go ahead and check our code. Congratulations, we're moving on. Okay, so step number 29, we are going to target the body, open up the curly brackets, and we need to make sure that the font family is set to sans serif. Next, we want the color of our text to be this hashtag. All right. And as I was typing, I saw that the values were changing. I saw the green, so I know that it is working. Let's go ahead and check our code. There we go. Let's move on to the next step. So I just want to take a real brief moment. If you are enjoying this type of learning, then I would highly suggest take a look at the link in the description. It's under the code zone on School. And this is where you can be part of a community. You can ask your questions. You can get the answers. We have weekly hangouts where we can hang out and talk a little bit about code, learn a little bit about each other, and more importantly, help build you up so that way you can reach your goal in becoming a developer. And so all disciplines are welcome, whether you are just starting out or whether you're an active developer or even looking for a job. That's what the community's for, is to share those wins and to build a network. So I hope to see you in the code zone, and we'll get started with this next step here. All right, so back to the regular scheduled program. Okay, so step number 30. So it says, before we get too far into the styling, we should make sure that we target the SR only class. Now, you can use CSS to hide the elements from the visual page, right? Why would we want to do this? What if they had a screen reader and you needed the screen reader to read these values, but you want this to be visually hidden to the person reading it? And so that's where what they're getting at here. Now, we do have something here that's new to us with going through the freeCodeCamp logic here. And it says here that we want to target the span that has the class. And then we have this weird looking little tilde key right next to the equal sign. And then we want the SR only class, right? And what are we doing here with this? And so I wanted to bring this over to a little bit of documentation and then a little bit of an example. And so what I'm going to do here is let's go ahead and first look at the documentation, and then I'm going to show you what is it talking about. So let's do that. So this is the W3C website, the true documentation here for CSS. And look, we have these square brackets here. We have the element, or the attribute actually. And then we also have this tilde equals and then some sort of value. So this represents the element's attribute, which is on the left side. And then we want to utilize that equal sign, but we're not saying, hey, it truly matches what's on the right side, the equal sign. It is trying to find a string match. And what do I mean by that? And that's why I wanted to show you the documentation, and then I'm going to hop over here to CodePen and explain what we have going on here. So if we take a look up here, I have something here called center, and I have something here called red text. Down here, I have something called center, and I don't have any red text class on there. But I came over here and I targeted the div that has a class, and it has to match center. Only one of my elements here is centering. I would like to have them both be centered utilizing this type of CSS targeting. And why is it like that? It's looking for an exact perfect match. So it's looking through all the divs and it says, okay, I'm looking at the class. Do I exactly match center? And this is the only one that does, because when it scanned this, it got both center and red text, and that is a negative. That falls down to a not truthy condition. And so that little tilde in here says, hey, let's find a match. If it matches anything inside there, then let's go ahead and center this, okay? So now you can see that they are both centered utilizing this find a match that's inside of there, okay? So anyways, I just wanted to describe that, and hopefully that kind of made sense. And let's go ahead and head over back to our freeCodeCamp coding challenge here for this step. All right, so right now, all it's really wanting us to do is grab this. We're going to paste it right there. We're also going to open up the curly brackets. And then here is where we want to have the border. We want to set that to 0. And that is what it's wanting us to do. Obviously, it's not being hidden right now. I'm sure we're going to add some more stuff to this in order to truly hide it. So let's go and check our code. That's exactly what they wanted. And now we can move on to the next step. All right, so step number 31 here, it says that we're going to be utilizing the clip property, and we are going to define the visible portions of the element. And so it wants us to start targeting this CSS element. Now, I will tell you that the clip property is more of a legacy type of Band-Aid in order to get this element kind of like off the screen for us to see. That's what we're trying to do. And we also have this clip path property, and we're going to be adding more things to it, obviously, to get it to be totally unseen. But I did want to discuss or take this as a little learning moment of this inset 50%. And so I have a CodePen set up, and I have 3 container boxes. And we can see that here's a box, here's going to be a clipped one, and then here is another box. And the reason that I am putting these 3 boxes on here is that as soon as I introduce this part right here, where we are clipping it, notice how it is disappearing. It's moving out of the way from being shown. And that's going to be the goal of what we're doing. But notice that there's this empty space here, right? And so that's where we want it to eventually, I think that's what we're leading up to. And I don't know, I haven't gone through this freeCodeCamp course, but this is where we will take it and smash it down into basically taking it out of the workflow here with a position absolute. And like I said, eventually I believe we're going to be making a width and a height in order to compensate for things, because if I were to take this clip path and totally remove it, we can see that the position absolute, it does take it out of the flow of the HTML document, and it shoved it over there in the 0 position over here of the parent. Again, take it for what it's worth. We're going to continue to go through freeCodeCamp and see what they are having us to do. So let's go ahead and go back to the code. All right, so now that we're back in the code, let's look at the following. We want to go ahead and add the clip here. And as far as the value, we're going to utilize the rect function to create that almost like a pixel width of an item, okay? And then the last thing here, we're going to go ahead and do the clip path. And then we want to set this to the inset function, and it being 50%, okay? And like I said, that's going to disappear things from where we want. So if I can go ahead and comment this out, we can still see that we have the dates here and here. Matter of fact, I can move my picture here, or better yet, I'll just turn it off for now and watch them disappear once we add this line of code in here. There you go. All right, that is how this inset is working. Let's go ahead and check our code. Congratulations. We are 47% complete. Let's keep on going. All right, we're on step number 32. And this kind of goes into what I was saying earlier. And I feel like we might be utilizing the absolute or the position absolute in the next step maybe. But we want to have the width and the height. We're going to set that to 1 pixel. And let's go ahead and see what that does here for us. There's the width, there's the height. And let's check our code. Congratulations, we're ready to move on to the next step here. So we'll see what we're going to be doing next. Maybe it is that position absolute. We'll see. All right, step number 33, it says to prevent the text context from overflowing, we want to go ahead and set the overflow to hidden. So let's go ahead and do that. And then set the white space property to no wrap. So let's go ahead and do that as well. Okay, let's check our code. Congratulations, we're moving on to the next step. All right, so we're really trying to hide this thing, huh? So we're going to go ahead and do our position absolute. That is exactly what I was telling you. You notice that our screen kind of shrunk up a little. And then it says we need to set the padding to be 0 on all 4 sides. And then for the margin, it wants us to lift it up by doing a -1 pixel on all of the sides. So let's go ahead and do a -1 pixel. And there we go. Okay, this will ensure that not only are they no longer visible, but they are not even within the page's view. I'm assuming it's if we were to take some sort of element and kind of remove it from the page and extracted it. So that way it's totally hidden, but it doesn't destroy the normal flow of a screen reader hovering their mouse over that section. Okay, let's go ahead and check our code. We got the congratulations. We're 52% complete. All right, let's keep on going. Okay, so time to style our header in step number 35. So we're going to go with the H1 selector. And it says we need to have a max width. We want to set that to 37.25 rem. Okay. Next, it wants us to have a margin. And we want the 0 position. So this is the top and bottom. And then we want the left and right to be auto. So that way it centers that there. And then as far as the padding goes, let's go ahead and set that to 1.5 rem. And then we want and that's for the top and bottom. And then the left and right, we want to set that to 1.25 rem. Okay. Now, keep in mind these rems here, they're talking about the root M, which happens to be, I believe, 16 pixels. So if we take 1.5, so I can bring this up here. If we can do let me bring my spotlight over, my calculator. 1.5 times 16 pixels, you get 24. So that's what it's equating to, is 24 pixels. And one of the things that as early HTML developers, if you're wanting to gauge things responsively, you can definitely base things off of the rem. And that's what we're doing here, which is the root M. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and check our code. Congratulations. Let's keep on going. Okay. So we're on step number 36 here, and it reads the following. We want to target the flex container, which is the H1 flex. So we're using that type of selector, and we want to make the display flex. Next, we want to reverse the direction on it. So in my mind, I'm imagining, hey, H1 here, I'm going to flip it, and it's going to be in reverse. And then we also want to add a gap, because right now it looks smashed together. So that's what we're going to do. So in order to target it, we're going to come over here. We're going to do H1, and we want to target the class of flex on it. So we'll do flex, and then we're going to open up that curly bracket, and then we want the display to be flex. And then let's set up the flex direction. Let's set that to column reverse. And the last part on here, we need to gap. We're going to set that to 1 rem. Okay, there we go. You can see that it did reverse it. Obviously, it's stacked on top of each other. And we have, hopefully, our completed code here. Let's go ahead and click on the check code. Congratulations, we're moving on to the next step. What do we have here in step 37? We have this pseudo selector, which is first of type. And here's some things that we need to think about is, what is this doing? If we read further along in here, it says that this is used to target the first element that it matches with that selector. And so when we combine it, we're looking for an H1 that has a class of flex, and then the span, okay, and we want to narrow that down to the first of its type. And so if we take a look at our HTML, I think this is where it comes into play here. Here's that H1. I'm going to close out of this so we can see it. So we have this nice H1, but we have 3 spans in there, okay? It is looking for an H1. It's looking for a span with a class name of flex, right? And it's also looking for the first of the kind and reading it from the HTML. Remember, the computer reads from the top to the bottom. And so when we are targeting the first of its kind, it's going to find this one here, right here. Because I'm trying to bring this up because if we take a look at our preview here, what is first? It's the second thing that's on there, right? But our CSS, we're targeting the first. Which one's it going to do? Well, everything is in reference to the original document, and it's going to make any kind of adjustments that we are going to make. It should be making it right here because that is the first of its kind. So let's go ahead and try this out and see if what I'm telling you is true. So we're going to come over here to the style CSS, and it wants us to do the following. We're going to grab this, and let me go ahead and code this out here. Okay, so we just copied this, and then we pasted that right here and just put curly brackets. Okay, so that's how we created that pseudo class here. And the next thing that we want to do to test this out, we're going to do font size, and then we want to adjust that to our liking here, which is 0.7 or 0.7 em. So we can go ahead and do that, 0.7 and then em. Okay, and notice that it did shrink this, which is the first of its kind. Now, I'll tell you, I don't know if I particularly like this approach or not, because this is going to cause us to maybe look and reassess. And what happens if later on I create a new span in here that now directly affects my CSS? And so what I would probably have done is, if I was caring that much about this span, I would have given it an ID of company. And that way it is clear in my CSS code what is in charge of it. So from a readability point of view, I'm not sure if I would have went with this, but maybe they're just trying to introduce us to this pseudo class selector so that we're familiar with it. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and check our code. I'm going to close out of this, check our code. Congratulations. Let's move on to the next part. Okay, we're on step number 38, and I just realized that I mentioned in the previous step, I was like, why are we utilizing these crazy pseudo selectors when it would be so much more readable by doing something else? And I totally forgot that this whole workshop was to get us introduced into these pseudo selectors. So that's why we're going through this. And I did want to explain this one here. And because you are going to be a developer, you're going to need to learn how to read the CSS to know what it is targeting if you happen to go into somebody's code and you actually see this. So the way that we're going to do this, it introduces the last type. It says that it does the exact opposite of what we just did in the previous step. But in here, we're going to create an H1. Okay, so now it's looking for the H1s. And obviously on a web page, there's only one, but it's looking for our H1. And then it's looking for the class of flex. And if we look inside here, we have the H1 right over here. Okay. And then we match it down here with a flex. Okay. And then it says that we're looking for the span that happens to be encased in this that matches the very last span. Okay. So that's what it's looking for. So it's not looking for this one. It's looking for the balance sheet one. Okay. Now, I know that might be hard to see on here, but we're going to the flex and then it's looking for the last of the type, but it has to be a span, which happens to be the balance sheet. Like I said, a lot of confusing things when we probably could have solved this with an ID that would have been a little more readable. So let's go ahead and apply this. So we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to copy this, the H1, last of type. I'm going to put a curly bracket on there. And then now I'm going to go ahead and do the font size. And let's set this to 1.2 rem. You can see that it got quite smaller compared to what it was. All right, perfect. Let's go ahead and check our code. And let's see what it is not there. I typed REM instead of M. So let's go ahead and do that. And now it has changed. Okay, perfect. There we go. Let's go ahead and check our code there. That was our problem. I did rem instead of EM. All right, moving on to the next step. Okay, so in step number 39, now we're targeting the section. It says we want to give a max width property of 40 rem. And then we also want to add a margin, 0 and auto, and that's going to center it. Visually, I'm taking a look at things. And as you are CSS wise looking at things, you're maybe trying to visualize what each one of these things are doing. It's a common pattern for margin and then 0 auto to kind of center your items on the page as far as a block goes. And then it says we want to add a border around this, 2 pixels solid. And then obviously I have no idea what color that is, but we're going to go ahead and make it. So how are we going to do this? It's going to be section. We don't need to add a period. We don't need to add a hashtag. We're just doing the element itself and targeting all of these sections. Next, we want the max width. We want to set that to 40 rem. And then the next thing is we want the margin. We want to set that to 0 auto, and that's going to center the items. And then we want the next thing on here to be the border. And then we want this to be 2 pixels solid. And then, so I don't make any typing errors, I'm just going to copy that and put a semicolon at the end. Okay. So as you can see, that the kind of centered things, I'm going to get rid of the index and we can take a look at it. We now have a max width and it is centered on the document. Okay. All right, let's take a look and check our code. Fingers crossed. All right, congratulations. Let's move on. All right, so step number 40, it says the last part of the table heading is the years. So go ahead and create years. So I'm going to do years here, utilize the hashtag. And then it says you want to enable the Flexbox. So flex, we want that display to be flex. Next, it says on here, we want to justify the content to be the end of the flex. So we'll do justify content, and we're going to set that to flex end. You can see that it is now shifted all the way over to the right. The next thing is it says on here that we need to make sure that the element is sticky. So we're going to do position sticky, and then we want the top to be 0. Now we're not going to be able to see the stickiness effect because it's scrolling. You can't scroll on this. And if you wanted to test this out, if we come up here to the section and just give it some sort of height here, maybe 200 hue height, you can see that now it's a larger receipt. And if we were to scroll, it is now stuck there at the top. Okay. So that is what we're trying to do with that. And it's trying to be shoved all the way at the top of this with the sticky. So that way the years will constantly stay as you are scrolling. Okay. And if you remember back when we were looking at this balance sheet, I just went ahead and went back to step number 1 here, that you do see it sticking up there at the top. All right, so I guess that's going to be the end goal here. Let's go ahead and go back to test out this code that we just got done doing. And the unit tests, they don't take a look at the previous stuff. They only take a look at the new stuff that we just added. So if we check our code, it should say that we passed here. Here we go. Let's move on to the next step. Okay, step number 41. It says now we can apply some color. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and do background. Let's set that to the following, and I'll paste that. Cool. Next, let's go ahead and do the text color. And hopefully we're thinking in our minds, what's that text color going to be? The triple F is white. And there we go. All right. Now I'm assuming we're probably going to be adjusting the width and getting some spacing in each one of these ears. So let's check our code. Congratulations. Let's move on. All right, we're on step number 42 here. We're being introduced to the Calc function for CSS. And really this gives us the ability to make minute decision points or even factors whenever we're trying to calculate a value that we want to use in our CSS. And so it's important to know that it's there. You will end up potentially utilizing this a lot when it comes to especially responsiveness, responsive designs and stuff, which is why you'd want to use the calc. Now, in here, we are utilizing it to affect if we take a look here, if we look at the padding, because that's where the calc function is being used and what freeCodeCamp is wanting. And remember, if we have 4 values, everything starts at the top and then it works its way clockwise, right? So up here, and then we are going to go to the right, and then down, and then left. We want 0.5 on the top for the padding. It's going to calculate the right side. And then as far as this value here, that's the bottom, and then we have the far left. Okay, so that's how it's going to read to you as we're going through it. So the first thing that we want to do is the margin. And for the margin, we want 0 on the top and bottom. And so because we only have 2 values, it goes top and bottom. And then it goes to left and right. That is how we read that. Next is the padding. And here, like I said, we have all of these values. And so I don't mistakenly type these in. I'm going to go ahead and copy them and put them here. But just know that this part right here, that is your top. This one right here where we're doing some calculations, because it's saying, hey, utilize 1.25 rem, and then whatever you get from that, also add 2 pixels to it. So we're also mix matching different units as well with this calc function. So there we go. Let's go ahead and put our semicolon in there. And I think that's what it wants. Let's go ahead and double check. Congratulations. Let's move on to the next step. Step number 43, this one looks super easy. By adding your position sticky, it moved the element into its own stack to ensure that these years elements, they don't get hidden by different stacks along the way. We're going to go ahead and apply a z-index. If you are unfamiliar with what z-index does, think of a layered cake. Every single element has a value, we'll say, of 1, for example. Whenever you lay it on there, everything gets a 1. But as soon as we give it a higher number, like this, 999, we're saying, hey, this one is going to be the very top layer. Now, if we come in here and we create another element that is a z-index of 998, this 999 overpowers the 998, and it will be on top. So anyways, I've seen developers put in just some sort of high value whenever you are wanting to ensure that this element stays on top of anything and everything. Okay, so let's go ahead and check our code. Congratulations, and let's go ahead and move on. Okay, step 44, we got something new. It says we want to style the text of your years element by creating a years span class selector. Now, there's something different about this one. We don't have an equal sign right here to specify the value. And the reason behind this, it says that this span class syntax will target the span element that has a class attribute regardless of the value. So it's scanning the document, it's looking for all the spans, and if they have a class, a class in the element, and it doesn't matter what class it is, it's going to select it. And it says we need to give it the bold font. And then we also need to make sure that the width is 4.5 rem and the text is aligned to the right. So let's go ahead and knock this out. So I'm going to start off with this, with years span class. And then I'm going to open up the curly brackets. And the first thing that I'm going to do is the width. We're going to set that to 4.5 rem. And then we're going to align, and we're going to set that to the right. And then the last thing that we want on here is the font weight. And let's go ahead and set that to bold. This is what we just got done completing. You can, again, highlight these, comment them out. You can see the before and after. Perfect. All right. I think that's all that it needs. Let's go ahead and check our code. All right. Moving on. All right. Step number 45. It says we wrapped our tables in a container called table wrap class. Let's go ahead and create that selector for that class and give the padding a 0 and 0.75 rem and so on. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to go ahead and do the class. Remember, classes have periods. So we're going to go ahead and do the class here of table wrap. And then I'm going to go ahead and open up the curly brackets. Next, as far as the property that we want to attack, that's going to be padding. And then we want to supply it these values. And again, if I was in a live class, I'd probably be asking you the questions of describe to me what each one of these are doing, right? Is how are we telling the CSS what these numbers mean, right? So just remember, it goes in a clockwise manner. You start at the top, and then it starts going clockwise, top, bottom, left. And then these rems are talking about the root M, which happens to be, like I said, I think it's 16 is the standard unless you specifically change it up above. All right, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and if you want to visually see things, we can toggle them and you can see how just giving it a little bit of padding on this step, and we'll see what we're doing next with this table wrap. I'm sure we're not done with it quite yet. All right, let's check our code. Congratulations, let's move on. Step number 46, we get introduced to the not portion of this. So we want to create a span with a not, and it is looking for the class of SR only. So the way that we want to work this one is the following. We're going to go ahead and come down here, and we want to target the spans, right? And we want to use that pseudo class here of the not. And then we want to supply what are we not trying to match with here. So we want to target the spans that are not SR only. So we're going to do SR only. And then we can come over here and we can say the following. We want the font weight to be normal. Okay. Believe that is what it is wanting here. Let's go ahead and check our code. Perfect. And again, if you are wanting to see what it did, you can take a look here. It kept the SR onlys bold. So anyways, went ahead and did that, and we're ready to go. All right, so what we're going to do here in step number 47, it's basically telling us that rather than having to consistently double check to make sure that we're not overwriting things, we want to utilize that keyword important. And what it's wanting us to do here, I already have this one kind of filled out, and we want to go ahead and do this to every single property. And that way we can ensure that it's not going to be overwritten. Instead of you watching me fill this all in, I'm going to go ahead and complete it and then show you what I did. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, so this is what it should look like. Every single one. Make sure you keep those semicolons in there as well. And like I said, this will ensure that we don't change anything down below when it comes to everything, because when the computer is looking at the CSS, it is doing a scan. And if we make an overwrite down below this, then it's going to use it to overwrite the properties that it sees up here. All right, so let's go ahead and check our code. We got the congratulations. Let's move on to the next step. Okay, so step number 48 here, it says now that we added the important keyword from up above, we're able to remove this not here. And so that's what we're going to do. Simply remove it. And we shouldn't see really any change on there. We're just saying it is unneeded at this point. All right, let's go ahead and check our code. Congratulations. Let's move on. So we're on step number 49. It says go ahead and create the table selector. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And then inside here, we want to do two properties. One is the border collapse and set it to collapse. Next is the border. We want to set that property to 0. All right, let's go ahead and check our code. Congratulations. Let's move on to number 50. All right, so now we're on step number 50, and it says ensure your table fills the container. So we want to set the width property. We want to set that to 100%. And then we also want to make this position relative and give it a margin of 3 rem. Okay, so let's go ahead and do all that. So we're going to come down here. We're going to do width. We're going to set that to 100%. And then it says that we want this to be relative. So we can already see that the width is now expanded. Now it's time to make the position relative. And then we want to go ahead and do the margin on the top. And we want to set that to 3 rem. Okay. So I gave it some spacing there. All right, let's go ahead and check our code. We got the congratulations, and let's move on. All right, so we're on step number 51 here, and it says next style the caption element. All right. And we want to make sure that the size of it is 1.3 em. And then we also give the text color that hex code. All right. So it says that we want to create a table caption selector. So that's what we're going to do right here. Table caption. And then we want the size. So the font size. Let's set that to 1.3 em. And then it says it wants the color to be this hashtag right here. So let me go ahead and grab it. Perfect. And let's go ahead and check our code. All right. It says that we need the font weight to be normal. All right. So I didn't see that part there. And normal weight. So all we have to do is come over here and do font weight. And let's set that to normal. There we go. It should work now. All right. Cool. Moving on to the next step. All right. Step number 52 here. It says now give the captions an absolute position. And we want to shift them negatively from the top of 2.25 and then from the left 0.5 rem. So let's go ahead and do that. So we want the position, we want that to be absolute. Let me spell position properly. Next is the top. We want to set that to minus 2.25 rem. And then we want to go ahead and do the left. We want to set that to 0.5. So you can see that the assets, the liabilities, they all shifted. Once we did this position absolute, it took it out of play and moved it to the far left of the 0, position of the nearest parent. So that's what we saw right there. And that's why we saw that table kind of collapse, or the captions collapse and go up there. So anyways, let's go ahead and hit check our code. Congratulations. Let's move on. All right, so step number 53 here, it does look a little tricky, but we're going to handle it here. It says we want to create a selector to target the TD, which is the table data elements within your table body. So what I would want you to think visually on what we're doing here is we want to target the T body and we want to target the TDs that are inside there. Okay. Next, it says on here, we want to give the width the full viewport width. And so what we can do here for that is width, we're going to do 100. Okay. So that makes it able to utilize the full width here. Next, it says that it wants the minimum, okay, and maximum of the 4 rem. So what we can do here is we'll do the minimum So we're going to do the min width and make that 4 rem and do the max width, let that be 4 rem as well. And you may be asking yourself, why are we doing it like this? And it gives you the explanation here. This approach ensures that the width will be fixed, whereas if we just set the width specifically, it would allow the elements to shrink to the container. And so this is forcing it to be 4 rem. All right. So anyways, this way is a preferred method, and they also doing some research into this as well, because I see that it's an important topic to talk about. There's also the CSS function called clamp that you might want to look into. We've done videos on that before as well. So anyways, this was going to work out well. Let's go ahead and check our code. And we got the congratulations. Let's move on to the next step. All right, so step number 54 might look a little tricky, but we'll go ahead and go through this here. So it says now target the th elements that are inside of your table body. So let's first go ahead and diagnose that. That's going to be tbody, table header. And then now we can start doing the targeting. It says that we want the width to be the entire container. So that would be 100%. And then it says, but we want to make it less with this by doing the 12 rem. So we want to constrain it by 12. And so what we can do here is we can do minus 12 rem. But because we're doing it this way, we need to utilize the calc function with this. So I'm going to come over here. We'll do calc. And then we're going to have it wrapped in parentheses. And that will make that nice and pretty for us. And it will do the calculations of utilizing the 100% width and then subtracting 12 rem to give it that look. So let's go ahead and check our code. And let's see here. I just need to space this out. It looks like. Let's go ahead and check the code one more time. There we go. All right, perfect. Cool. All right, moving on to the next one. Step number 55, it says utilize the attribute and value selector, right? And so in this case here, we're going to be targeting the table row that has a specific class called total. And the selector says that we want to specifically for the table row elements with the total class. And so we're going to give it a bottom border, and it provides us with the code for the CSS. And it says make the font bold. So we're just going to come over here. We're going to go ahead and grab it. And we're going to come down here, target it. And then inside here, it wants us to do the border on the bottom. And we want to set that to the 4 pixels. And then this hex color. And then we want the font weight. And we want to set that to bold. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and fix my issue. I want this to be 4 pixels. There we go. And then let's go ahead and check our code. Congratulations. So we see we got the double lines on there, and then the totals on all the bottoms are now bolded. All right, moving on. All right, so step number 56, it says utilizing that same selector syntax, which is right up here. So we're going to go ahead and grab it. And then it says we want to target the TH, the table header. And then this is where we want to go ahead and add in our padding and our text alignment, right? So what we're looking at, what we're picturing here in our minds is that, hey, this total over here, we need to bring it all the way over to the left and then give it that type of padding around it so it's not so close to those lines. And it gives it a little bit more space up above as well. So anyways, let's go ahead and do that here. So we want to text align, and we want to set that to the left. So now it's on the left. Now we want to go ahead and give it the padding that it wants. And then I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this up here. All right. Perfect. Let's go ahead and check our code. All right. Congratulations. Moving on to the next step. So step number 57, it wants us to target the table rows that have the class of total and then target the TD elements within there. That's what it's wanting us to do. And it wants us to align this text to the right and give it a padding of the following. So let's go ahead and draw this up. So we are going to do TR total, hit the space bar, and we're going to target the table datas this time. And then we want the text align. We want to set that to the right. And then following that, you can see that the totals have all shifted to the right. Then we want to do the padding. And so we're going to see it right here. So 0 on the top and bottom, and then left and right is going to be the 0.25 rem. All right. And I think that's all that this one needs. Let's go and check our code. Congratulations. Let's move on. All right. So this one says we're going to utilize this pseudo selector here called nth-of-type. And we can utilize this to target specific elements based upon how they stack up in the order of the HTML document, as well as their siblings. So we want to use this pseudo selector to target the third TD elements within your total table rows. How we're going to do this is we're going to, very similar to what in line 112, is we want to do the table row, we want the total, and we also want the TD, but this time we want the nth of type, and then the left and right parenthesis will come back to what we want here. Just real quick demo, we can do a background color, and we'll set this to pink. And so we can come over here, and this takes a number. And so if we do 3, you'll see that they're all highlighted in pink. It's taking the third one and applying whatever kind of logic that we want to this. And so if we did 2, it would do the second one. And so that's what it's getting at here. So we want to target the third, and then we want to come down here and we want to adjust the padding. And the reason that I did the background color is I don't feel like this padding right. We can actually see a big difference in it. So I wanted to make sure that we saw what this is actually doing. All right, so I can get rid of this. I don't need it anymore, but it is a nice little effect and very useful when it comes to if you know exactly how many of that element, you can target it utilizing that pseudo selector. So let's go and check our code. Congratulations, we're moving on to the next step. All right, we're on step number 59. It says give your TR total elements a hover effect. Changes the background color to that color. So let's go ahead and work on it. So that's going to be TR total. And then we're going to utilize that pseudo class here, and we're going to do hover. Okay. Next, we want to go ahead and add the background, and we can go ahead and grab this. And so now when we hover over these, we get that nice little color. All right, let's go ahead and check our code. There we go. Congratulations. Let's move on. All right, step number 60 here, it says, go ahead and select your TD elements with the class value of current and make the font italic. All right, so this one's pretty easy. We're just going to do the TD current, and then we want the font style. We want to set that to italic. All right, let's go ahead and check our code. Congratulations. Let's move on. Step number 61, let's go ahead and select the TR elements with the class of data. And then we can go ahead and utilize the background image. And then we're going to set it to that linear gradient that it gave us right here. There we go. Got a nice little gray. Let's check our code. Congratulations. Let's move on to the next step. All right. So step number 62. It says with our table header element, with inside of our table row data, so TR data, table header, it says we want to align the text to the left. So text align, then we're going to set that to left. Then we want the padding for the top. We're going to set that to 0.3 rem. Padding left, we're going to set that to 0.5 rem. All right, let me fix that. Perfect. And let's check our code. Congratulations. We're moving on to the next step. All right, we can see that we're chaining here. We want the table row with the data, and then we want the table header that is also with the description. So we're really just targeting the description that's inside there. And so it says here, go ahead and have the class set to description and where your table header element in your data table row, give them a display block, set the text to italic with normal weight, and the position them with padding, and set that to the following. And then we're also going to do the right margin. So a lot of stuff going on in this one. Let's go ahead and break it down here. All right, so I'm going to grab this up here. That's what it wants me to go ahead and do. And then I'm going to open up the curly brackets. So the very first thing that it said for us to do is display. We want the block. So now it's going to be a block level element. Next is the reading here. It says make the text italic. So we'll do that. So we'll do font style. We're going to set that to italic. Next, it says the font weight needs to be normal. And then it says that it wants us to position this and to have the padding set to the following. So we'll do that. We go ahead and grab the values for it. It's already starting to look like a table, right? And then we want to go ahead and do the margin right. We want to set that to negative 13.5 rem. Okay, I think we're finally cooking here. Let's go ahead and check our code. Congratulations, we're moving on to the next step. All right, looks like 64 here is probably the hardest one yet. It says your span element now all have more specific stylings, which means that we can actually remove this span rule. So we no longer need it, so we can go ahead and remove it. And then let's go ahead and check our code. There we go. Let's move on to the next step. 65. So it says our dollar amounts are currently misaligned. That is very true. So it says within your tr data elements, so we're going to do tr data, go ahead and do a vertical align and align these to the top. Okay, so we want the horizontal to align the text to the right and set the padding here to the following. And then we want to target the table data, and then we can open up those curly brackets right there. So the first thing that we want to do is vertically align these. So we're going to do vertical align, and we want to set that to the top. So you can see already they have shifted up, but they're not in a perfect place quite yet. Next, it says that we want to do the padding. Let's go ahead and set that up to what they gave us. And then we want to follow this up with the text alignment to the right. Perfect. Okay, let's go ahead and check our code. Congratulations. Let's move on to the next step. All right, so we're on step number 66. I think this is the last one, I'm hoping. It says, let's go ahead and create another selector here. This is going to be for the table data. And it says specifically the last one. So let's go ahead and go through that. So what does that look like? So we want the TR, we want the data, and then we want the TD, and then we're going to utilize a pseudo class, and it's going to be last of type. Okay. So once we have that, then we can come down here and do the padding right. And we want to set that to 0.5. Okay. And so you can see that just that right side got shifted there, and I can go ahead and comment that out so you can see it. There it is. All right, let's go ahead and check our code. And then we've got the congratulations. So all I have to say on this one is, wow, it was long for sure. We did a lot of the HTML. We did a little bit of the CSS. We learned a little bit about some class selectors, as well as reinforce those ideas, those concepts of pseudo classes, right? And so anyways, glad that you watched the video. Hopefully it helped, and make sure you subscribe. Take a look at the channel. We're going to continue going through all of these modules, so you might as well subscribe. All right, we'll see you in the next video. Take care.